My name is Eleanor Hartman, but most people in Savannah know me as Judge Hartman. That title didn't come easy. 5 years ago, I left behind a family that called me a disgrace. They didn't just shame me, they erased me. And now, they want me back, as if the last 5 years never happened. It started with a letter. Well, technically, it was a wedding invitation. Thick, cream-colored, with the Hartman family crest stamped in gold like some royal decree. Inside, a note scribbled in my mother's shaky handwriting. "Please come. I miss you." They don't know I'm writing. My fingers trembled when I held it, not because of fear, but because of everything it dragged back. The laughter at my expense, the cold silence as I packed my bags, the way my brother Nathan toasted my so-called failure in front of a room full of relatives. I had spent years building a life outside their orbit. Law school, late nights in courtrooms, fighting for people no one wanted to help. I became a judge at 35, a fact my family never acknowledged. And now, Nathan was getting married to Rachel Moore, a rising star in housing rights law. Funny how life works, isn't it? As I stood in my apartment, staring at that envelope under the kitchen light, I felt something stir deep inside. Not anger, not grief, but a quiet, simmering resolve. I wasn't going back to prove them wrong or to rub success in their faces. I was going back because it was time to stop letting their silence define me. Would you walk back into the lion's den if your family had cast you out? Would you forgive? Would you fight? I didn't know my answer yet, but I was about to find out. Thanksgiving 5 years ago was the last time I stood in the same room with my family. I remember the smell of rosemary turkey, the clink of fine crystal, and the heavy hush that fell over the dining room as Nathan, a few glasses deep, rose to make a toast. "Some of us," he said, his grin sharp as a knife, "choose to serve the family legacy. Others." His eyes flicked to me, seemed determined to disgrace it. Laughter rippled through the room, awkward and thin, like people weren't sure if they should be amused or ashamed. My mother, Margaret, clutched her wineglass tighter, her mouth a pinched line. My father looked at the centerpiece, pretending I didn't exist. I was 29, a freshly minted public defender, working long hours in courtrooms crowded with people who couldn't afford the justice they deserved. To the Hartmans, that wasn't success. It was failure dressed up as principle. That night, I folded my napkin, stood without a word, and left. No one followed me. No one called. Days became weeks, weeks became years, and silence stretched between us like a canyon. In the present, I sat at my kitchen table, the invitation open in front of me. My fingers traced the gold lettering. Nathan Hartman and Rachel Moore. I didn't know Rachel, but I knew her kind, polished, ambitious, the kind of woman my family prized. Still, that note from my mother was a crack in the stone wall they'd built between us. I called Dana, my best friend since law school. "I got the invitation," I told her. There was a pause on the line. "Ellie, are you really thinking of going?" I rubbed my forehead. "I don't know. Part of me wants to throw it in the trash. Another part. Maybe it's time." "Not for them," Dana said softly. "For you." Later that night, unable to sleep, I pulled out an old box from the back of my closet. Inside was a letter from my grandfather, the only person who ever believed in me without conditions. I unfolded it carefully, his familiar scrawl trembling across the paper. "Real power isn't loud, Ellie. It's standing tall without pushing others down. You weren't born to be their favorite. You were born to outgrow them." I held the letter to my chest, breathing in its steady strength. 5 years was a long time to carry a wound. Maybe it was time to stop letting it fester. The next morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't going back for revenge or reconciliation. I was going back to reclaim something I had lost. Not their approval, but my own peace. The morning I decided to go back, Savannah was wrapped in a soft silver mist. I stood by the window, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the world blur outside. For the first time in years, the thought of facing my family didn't send a wave of panic through my chest. It sent something else, resolve. Before I could change my mind, I sat down at my laptop and typed in Rachel Moore's name. I needed to know exactly who Nathan was marrying. It didn't take long to find her. Rachel was no ornamental bride. She was a rising star in housing law, passionate about tenant rights, and fierce in the courtroom. And then, there it was, a news article. 8 months ago, she had appeared in my courtroom, standing tall as she argued for a group of tenants facing eviction. I hadn't connected her name back then. There had been no smug introductions, no signs of her connection to Nathan, just a young lawyer doing the right thing. I leaned back in my chair, a wry smile tugging at my lips. My brother, the man who had mocked my career as a public defender, was marrying a woman shaped by the rulings I had written from the bench. Life, I thought, had an impeccable sense of humor. But the decision to go wasn't as simple as showing up. There was the question of what it would cost me, emotionally, mentally. I called Dana again that night, pacing the length of my apartment. "Ellie," Dana said quietly, "what do you want from this?" I hesitated, the words slow to form. Closure, maybe. Or just to stop feeling like I ran away. Dana's voice softened. Then go. But go for you, not to prove anything to them. Later, under the dim light of my bedroom, I pulled out the necklace my grandfather had given me when I passed the bar, a silver pendant shaped like Lady Justice. I fastened it around my neck, feeling its familiar weight settle against my skin. It wasn't a weapon. It was a reminder. The morning I mailed the RSVP, I took a detour. Instead of heading straight to court, I drove to the cemetery where my grandfather was buried. The air was crisp, the ground damp from an early rain. I knelt at his grave, brushing stray leaves from the marble, and set down a small bouquet of lilies. For a long moment, I just sat there, letting the silence wrap around me. "You always saw me," I whispered. Even when no one else did. I reached into my coat pocket, fingers closing around the old letter he'd written me. "Real power isn't loud, Ellie. It's standing tall without pushing others down." The words had carried me through law school, through sleepless nights in court, through the ache of being cut off from my own blood. They carried me now. When I stood, brushing the damp earth from my knees, I felt lighter. Not whole, not healed, but lighter. I slipped the letter back into my coat, turned toward the car, and drove to the courthouse. That afternoon, as I climbed the marble steps, a courthouse clerk nodded at me. "Morning, Judge." I smiled faintly. "Morning." It was the smallest thing, but it grounded me. Whatever waited at that wedding, I wouldn't be walking in as the woman who left 5 years ago. I'd be walking in as the woman I had become, and that was everything. The Hartman estate looked exactly as I remembered, grand, polished, and cold. The driveway sparkled under the late afternoon sun, lined with cars that cost more than most people's homes. As I stepped out of my car, I caught my reflection in the window. The simple black sheath dress, the low heels, the Lady Justice pendant resting just below my collarbone. I had chosen them carefully. Not armor, not camouflage, just me. Inside, the house buzzed with the kind of forced cheer only old money could manage. Waiters in starched uniforms floated through the crowd, champagne flutes balanced on silver trays. Conversations flickered and died as I passed, replaced by polite smiles stretched a little too tight. I handed my coat to a young server and moved through the entryway, past portraits of Nathan at every stage of his charmed life. Baby Nathan, graduate Nathan, surgeon Nathan. There was no trace of me on these walls. In the side parlor, I overheard whispers. "She actually came? I heard she's just a traffic judge. Well, it's not like she's doing real work." I felt the words brush against me, sharp as thorns, but I didn't flinch. Not anymore. The main ballroom was a study in overindulgence. Garish floral arrangements, towers of champagne, a jazz quartet playing softly near the fireplace. I found my seat, tucked between two distant cousins who avoided eye contact. Across the room, Nathan held court, a glass of whiskey in hand, his arm around Rachel. She looked radiant, but something in her eyes flickered, a shadow beneath the smile. A delicate chime rang out as a server tapped his glass. Nathan raised his drink. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice warm, smooth, and practiced. It means the world to Rachel and me to have family gathered, celebrating the future of the Hartman name. A ripple of polite applause, Nathan's gaze swept the room and paused, just for a second, on me. We're grateful, he continued, for all kinds of success stories, even the unconventional ones. Another ripple, this time laced with sharp-edged laughter. I took a slow breath, felt the cool metal of the pendant at my throat, and stood. The room quieted. All eyes turned. I walked to the grand piano and set down a simple manila folder. With careful, deliberate movements, I opened it. Headlines gleamed under the chandelier light. Awards for judicial excellence, articles on housing reform, letters of commendation from the state bar. My name printed over and over, in places Nathan could never erase. I picked up one letter, unfolded it slowly, and read aloud. For outstanding service in judicial equity and commitment to public interest law. My voice didn't waver. The room was so quiet, I could hear the click of a camera shutter somewhere near the back. I let the silence bloom, then set the letter down. Funny, I said lightly. For someone who supposedly couldn't handle life, I seem to have kept rather busy. A murmur swept through the crowd. Nathan's face paled. For the first time all evening, his perfect smile faltered. But it wasn't Nathan I was watching. It was Rachel. Her eyes flicked between me and the documents, confusion shifting into recognition, then hardening into something sharp and clear. Slowly, deliberately, she slipped the engagement ring from her finger. The room seemed to inhale at once. "You lied," she said, not loudly, but with a quiet, surgical precision that cut deeper than any scream. Nathan opened his mouth, but no sound came. Rachel set the ring on the piano and turned to me. For one long heartbeat, our eyes met. "Thank you," she said softly. Then she walked away, shoulders straight, steps unhurried, leaving behind the perfect image Nathan had worked so hard to build. I stood there a moment longer, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken things settle into the quiet. Then I turned, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked back to my seat. The night carried on. Polite laughter, music, the clink of glasses. But something had shifted, the way a fault line trembles just before it breaks wide open. The fallout didn't take long to arrive. By the time I got home that night, slipped out of my dress, and poured myself a glass of water, my phone buzzed on the counter, lighting up with headlines. Not from the major outlets, no, Nathan was smarter than that, but from the tabloids, the gossip blogs, the dark corners of the internet where reputations go to die. Anonymous source claims disgraced judge bullied her way to the bench. Former classmates say Eleanor Hartman was emotionally unstable. Who is Judge Hartman really? I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and let the initial sting pass. This was Nathan's playbook, dirty, underhanded, and predictable. He didn't understand that I'd already prepared for it. Weeks ago, the moment I decided to attend the wedding, Dana and I had put together a press package, copies of my judicial appointments, letters of endorsement from senior judges, awards, media coverage of my work in housing reform and juvenile justice. The truth, laid out plainly. The next morning, while Savannah stretched awake under a pale sun, we released it across all my public channels. No rants, no pleading. Just one quiet post anchored by a quote, "Facts are stubborn things." John Adams. By noon, every major news outlet had picked it up. Local radio buzzed with outrage, not at me, but at the obvious smear campaign. Public defenders, housing advocates, former clients, even law professors came forward, not because I asked, but because they wanted to. They spoke on my behalf, fierce and unshakable. Meanwhile, Nathan's carefully curated image began to crack. Word spread that his PR firm had quietly dropped him. Invitations to join prestigious medical boards were rescinded. Donors backed away. His golden boy glow dulled to a desperate flicker. And my family? They did what the Hartmans always did when the house caught fire. They tried to disappear behind polite statements and closed doors. But this time, silence wasn't neutral. It was part of the story. The calls started trickling in, second cousins, aunts, even old family friends. We always knew you were special, Ellie. I never believed what they said about you. You're stronger than all of them combined. Too little, too late. I answered none of them, because the truth had already done what years of arguing never could. It stood, solid and undeniable. Instead, I turned my focus to what mattered: the work, the life I'd built far away from the gilded prison of my childhood home. A few weeks later, I signed the acceptance letter for a federal judgeship, a role earned not through family connections, but through sleepless nights, impossible cases, and the quiet, relentless belief that I didn't need their permission to be great. When I placed my signature at the bottom of that letter, my hand didn't shake. And when I dropped it into the outgoing mail, I didn't look back. 1 year later, on a warm spring evening, I stood at the entrance of the Savannah Community Foundation's annual gala, an event I had helped organize, not for prestige or press, but for the neighborhoods that had trusted me long before anyone else did. The scent of jasmine drifted through the air as laughter and music floated out from the ballroom. Inside, there were no marble columns, no family crests on the walls, no desperate performances for approval. Just people. Public defenders, teachers, housing advocates, the kind of folks who understood that real work rarely makes headlines. I wore a simple black gown that night. No designer label, no flashy jewelry, just the old silver Lady Justice pendant at my throat. A reminder of where I came from, and how far I'd come on my own. As I moved through the crowd, I saw familiar faces. Not relatives, not the people who shared my blood, but the ones who had become my true family. Colleagues who fought beside me in courtrooms, neighbors who had cheered for every hard-won victory, young lawyers I had mentored, wide-eyed and determined. And then, at the edge of the room, I saw her. Rachel. She wasn't the woman I had seen at the engagement party, or the one who had walked away from Nathan with quiet steel in her spine. She stood a little taller now, her eyes clearer, her posture lighter. No designer gown, no ring on her finger, just jeans, a blouse, and a strength she didn't need to flash to be seen. She crossed the room slowly. When she reached me, she didn't offer apology or explanation. Instead, she held out her hand, not in pity, not in regret, but in recognition. I took it. For a moment, the noise of the room faded. The music, the clinking glasses, the hum of conversation, it all softened around the quiet truth between us. We weren't defined by the Hartmans anymore, or by the chaos Nathan had left in his wake. We were standing in the lives we had built, separate and whole. Later that night, I found myself standing alone by the wide windows overlooking the Savannah River, watching the city lights dance on the water. I reached up, fingers brushing the pendant at my throat. They tried to erase me from the story, I thought, a small smile tugging at my lips. I wrote a better one instead. Sometimes the deepest scars don't come from strangers. They come from the people who were supposed to love us first. But scars aren't the end of the story. Sometimes they're just where it begins.